And now I would like to ask Inge for her statement, and especially you, as Imelda mentioned, you will be speaking also about Ukraine. You have.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Michel, Mr. Ambassador, for inviting me here. And thank you very much, Sister Imelda, for your very touching and moving and so informative talk. I learned something new, and I'm really happy that I know now to whom I can turn in Albania, because sometimes we receive questions where to address to in Albania. So thank you very much. So what you see what I'm wearing today. So yellow and blue and yellow for the Ukrainian flag. I bring to you now in my talk or in our conversation a few general aspects on human trafficking in Germany, but also I would like to address the Ukrainian war and the results from that. The results, I mean, the ongoing crisis, a humanitarian crisis. And you see me also very, let's say, depressed or upset about what happens at the border, at the German-Polish border, or in the stations here, in the bus terminals, or in the central stations of Berlin, for example, when Ukrainian women and their children come as refugees, obviously, and they are already attacked by traffickers, and not by the men, not only by men, offering them shelters, being good willing hosts, but they aren't. But they're not only approached by men, but also by women, by the forced prostitutes of these brothel keepers, of the pimps, of the traffickers. Because, from woman to woman, from Ukrainian woman to Ukrainian woman, the connection is much more made from heart to heart than with a German man, let's say, or whatsoever nationality this trafficker may be. But let's have a look at this later on. You see me very touched by these actual events going on here in Germany. But let's start one after the other. So, Michel, you told the audience, which is true, that I'm also here for Terre des Femmes, which was established in 1981, and also for Solvodi, which was established in 1985. So, Terre des Femmes, I'm in the board of Terre des Femmes, the vice president of Terre des Femmes. Terre des Femmes is Germany's largest women's rights organization. We are not an aid organization, so no shelters, no consultation. But what we do in Terre des Femmes is awareness raising for women's rights violations which happen to girls and women only because they're female. So female genital mutilation, forced marriages, domestic violence, sexual violence, forced prostitution and trafficking. And of course, international collaboration with partnership organizations abroad in order to help women get rid or avoid these women's rights violations. We do also lobbying, so speak with politicians in order to change laws, in order to establish laws, in order to raise awareness among society and among the politicians. So this is what Terre des Femmes is doing since now more than 40 years. We celebrated our 40th anniversary last year. What Solvodi does, you may know already, and I'm so very pleased to see here in the chat also Agnes Mailu from Solvodi, Solgidi in Kenya. Solvodi, the abbreviation stands for Solidarity with Women in Distress. Solidarity with Women in Distress was established in 1985 by Schwester Lea Ackermann, Sister Lea Ackermann in Africa, actually in Kenya. And she then, after the fall of the Iron Curtain, moved or established the helping organization also in Germany, because after what took place after the fall of the Iron Curtain in in Western Europe was that a lot of women and girls from Eastern Europe came over as victims of trafficking. And so she saw the need and the misery of all these women and girls and established her helping organization, Solvodi, as well in Germany. But the origin is in Africa, where she lived and worked as a sister and established so much help, which runs until today in Kenya. Not only Solvodi's solidarity with women in distress, but also with Solgidi, so solidarity with girls in distress. So you see me as the vice president of Terre des Femmes, and you see me also as the president of Solvodi Bavaria here in Munich. I'm sitting in Munich. And Solvodi in Germany has 19 helping centers. So it's partly shelters, it's partly consultation centers. And alone in Bavaria, we do have five shelters and consultation centers with Solvodi, but 19 in whole Germany. So this is the other part. This is hands-on helping women, counseling them, getting a psychological, medical help, and legal consulting, and all what is needed in order to help victims of trafficking or victims of violence, female victims of violence and female victims of trafficking. Let me have a look together with you at the phenomenon of human trafficking in Germany. And later on, let's have also a look what did the Corona crisis to that phenomenon, and later on, what does the Ukraine war to that add to that phenomenon. So first of all, just to give you an estimated number of women and girls in prostitution in Germany, it's like we estimate between 200,000 and 1 million women and girls in prostitution in Germany. Of course, as you know, because every number is just an estimated number, these are estimated numbers. So we do not have exact numbers on that. We have only these estimations. And funnily enough, since I do my humanitarian work and my awareness raising work in order to prevent or to combat human trafficking, which dates back to 20 years ago, these estimated numbers never change. So there are no studies, there are no real numbers for that in Germany. Obviously, there is no money or no political will to have these exact numbers. So estimated numbers. But what is really obvious is that 80 until 98% of the women and girls in prostitution are migrant women and girls. So they come from all over the place, but mostly, of course, from Eastern Europe, from Southeastern Europe. So most of them come from Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, and also Ukraine. I mean, you see Romania and Bulgaria, they are EU countries, European Union countries since 2007. So most of the very young women in prostitution are from Romania and Bulgaria because the European Union was associated with that country since 2000 and 2001, and in 2007 they came into the European Union. So we do have most of the women in prostitution are from Romania, Bulgaria, and then Hungary, which is also a EU country, but also Ukraine, which I will be talking about later on. In Germany, prostitution is a legal business. So these girls and women are, or let's say the women, the very young women, are in legal brothels or in flats or in street prostitution. Yeah? But as I say a little bit cynically, maybe, in Germany, prostitution is more or less considered as a job as every other job. Yeah? Unfortunately, this is the case since the year 2000, when the by then government decided that they would like to destigmatize women in prostitution and help them getting social security, social insurance. But unfortunately, this way of liberalization and legalization of prostitution failed, which was quite obvious like 5 years after the legislation was made. So then in 2017 we had another legislation which aimed at protecting so-called Prostituiertenschutzgesetz, so it aims at protecting women in prostitution. A little amendment, so let's say, or an addition to that further first legislation in 2000. So Germany is, since then, prostitution is considered as more or less as a job as every other. In that time, in the same time, since 2000 in Sweden, Sweden changed the legislation into prostitution is violence. So the so-called Swedish model, which became later on a role model for other Scandinavian countries, the Swedish model became the so-called Nordic model in that time. And I say this because Terre des Femmes and also Solvodi and very many other organizations in Germany, they really appeal for that Nordic model. We want to have the Nordic model established in Germany as well. And just to give you the few pillars of the Nordic model, the first pillar is prostitution is violence. So the Nordic model says, or the Swedish model says, prostitution is violence against women and girls, and it's not. You cannot bring it together with equality of women and men and with human dignity. So prostitution is violence. This is the first pillar. The second pillar is the Nordic model wants to really help and protect women and girls in prostitution. So they should have real help in order to get out of prostitution and to have lead a life free from violence. And therefore, the women in prostitution are decriminalized. So the fully decriminalization of women in prostitution, but the criminalization of those who bring women into prostitution, which is traffickers, of course, and pimps, but also the Johns, the so-called sex buyers. So criminalize the Johns and help the women. And another pillar in the Nordic model is the early awareness raising in schools and in kindergartens. So from early childhood on, girls and boys learn that, hello, girls and women are not for sale. So this is what the Nordic model is like, and we, Terre des Femmes and Solvodi and a lot of other organizations, really put pressure on our government since 20 years, or especially in the last, let's say, well, Terre des Femmes was not always in favor of the Nordic model. They decided only in 2014 to join that appeal to politics, but. It's not only the organizations who say we need the Nordic model. It's also step by step. It's also the police. So the police, as I said before, most of the women and girls come from Southeastern Europe. So prostitution in Germany became a racist problem. Most of the women are migrant women, and we know that prostitution is exploitation of the female body and making the female body to a sex object. So, and police, in the meanwhile, also comes to the conclusion, of course, they cannot tell it so openly, but they do it in the meanwhile quite openly, that they say, what we see is a total perversion of prostitution in Germany, because since it became so liberal and so legalized, what happened is that Germany became the brothel of Europe and a paradise for traffickers. Because what have earlier been the traffickers and pimps, dubious or notorious people in the prostitution milieu, they are now entrepreneurs. They're businessmen. Everything seems to be so clean, and a brothel is just a company as every other company, which is of course not true. We know this, yeah. But by that legislation means that really criminals became now businessmen, yeah. So, and the women from Southeastern Europe are exploited in a very mean way. I brought to you now, I hope this is okay, and I hope the technique will work. I was so inspired by your films and your personal stories, Sister Imelda, that I decided to show you a few slides. And I just start and tell you the story of Joanna. So this girl is called Joanna Condea. Joanna Condea is a girl from Romania. By the time that this picture was taken, she was like 16 or 17 years old. And it goes back to a time to, let's say, 2013, yes, 2013, 2014. Ioana is a girl from Romania, just 1.5 hours away from Bucharest, the capital of Romania, and she lived the life of a young girl, of a young woman in Romania, in a small village. So she went out with her friends, she had fun, and then she became pregnant from her boyfriend, and she wanted to keep the little baby. So she gave birth to that little son, to David. And David, the little son, now here you can see it with the family. It was the, how do you call it, baptism, yeah. So this is the mother and the father and a relative in the background. So Ioana was a young mother with almost 17 or 18, very young mother, but she wanted to keep David and wanted to give David a good future. And then she decided to go to Germany because one of her best friends, Florentina, a friend from school, from her early school, and also neighbor, she called her and said, well, look, Ioana, I'm in Germany and I'm with my husband here, with Robert Tănase, also Romanian, and I'm in Germany, and in Germany they need people who help them with their elderly people and with the household, and also in restaurants and so come over here, and you will be with us, and we protect you, and so on. And so Ioana decided to go to Germany. And she came into Germany in March 2014. First of all, she was 18 years old, and she came first of all with a bus. Her first bus stop was in Leipzig. And in Leipzig, from Leipzig on, she was immediately forced into prostitution by Florentina and Robert. Not only in Leipzig, but also in Bremen, in the northern part of Germany, and then finally here in Köln. This is the inner city of Köln, Cologne. And she came into Germany in March, and she ended up in July 2000, what did I say, 14? Yes, July 2014 in the inner city in Köln. And you see here, this is the hotel in the Glockengasse, so it's an apartment hotel, and you see the police. The police was called to that apartment hotel because Ioana was found there without consciousness. She was beaten up by her pimp, by this Robert Tănase, the husband of her friend, Florentina. It was not the first time that she was beaten up, but she lost consciousness in that beating because Robert Tănase beat her up brutally, and then left together with Florentina this apartment. She was found hours later, Ioana was found hours later, unconsciously and with severe head damages. And now there is a trigger warning. So now there's a photo, a slide I will show you, which might trigger trauma. So be aware. So you see now here Ioana, after she was delivered into the hospital with her severe head damages, she had to undergo an operation. She was in coma, and she was kept in coma until the end of the year because she was not only beaten up so severe that the bleedings in her head were so heavy for the operation, but she became also a spastic, paralyzed woman. So she could not, after they got her from the coma back, she could not speak, she could not eat, she could not move. She was paralyzed. And no one knew who this girl was. So the police got her in July 2014, and they did not know who she was. And so they cooperated with the press and said, please, we have to publish something in order someone knows maybe who she is. And then this was the only time that something was reported about Ioana in Germany. So Ioana was identified by another girl, which also was in prostitution, another young woman who said, well, yes, this is Ioana. And only by then, and it was already end of August, beginning of September, so 1.5 months later, that the parents were informed that Ioana was found injured. This is Robert Tanasse. Robert Tanasse, the husband of Florentina, Ioana's friend. So Robert Tanasse was already by then in Romania, in the homeland, searched for or looked for criminal, but he was in Germany, and he posted these things on his Facebook website. He was, he was looked after because of murder or attempted murder in Romania, but he was in Germany. Here we have another Facebook picture, and this is another picture which was published in the Romanian press. So this was also only published in Romania press and German press. There was now no publications about that case. This is Florentina. Florentina, after this horrible beating which received Ioana, she separated from Robert and she went back to Romania. She fled to Romania. And then, this is a picture taken from a talk show in Romania. She testified in a talk show in Romania about the case of Ioana. And that's why Romanian police and later on also German police, informed by Romanian police, came across the connection to Robert Tanasse. Yeah, so out of the testimonial of Florentina, via Romanian police to German police, Robert Tanasse could finally be arrested in Germany. But look, this is Florentina. Florentina, in an ad in Germany, in a prostitution ad. It's a prostitution flat, as you see, Naumburg. It's a small town near Leipzig. And it's a fully legalized flat, prostitution flat in Wenzelsgasse, where she was offered by Robert Tanasse. And you see her nickname, Roberta. Yeah, you see Eastern European background. This is the website of the flat. So normal legalized prostitution. It's the same flat in which not only Florentina was forced, but also Ioana was forced into prostitution. And there was also a flat in Leipzig and a flat in Bremen and a flat and this apartment flat in Köln. And all these flats were kept by Robert. And I talked with Leipzig police officers later on when researching in this case. And Leipzig police told me that they were several times in the Leipzig flat in order to make contact with the renter of this flat, with Robert Tanasse, but they never found him. They found Roberta, so Florentina, and they found Ioana, but never Robert Tanasse. So legal prostitution, but it's not prostitution, it's trafficking. Also, Florentina was victim of trafficking, and also Ioana was victim of trafficking. And this is the mother of Ioana, because when it was clear that Ioana is Ioana, and the parents were informed, the mother, Graziella, had to somehow come to Germany, and she had no money. I mean, these are very poor people, very nice people, but poor people. I mean, Romanian village, yeah. And so we had to raise donations in order that we could supply Graziella with enough money for fuel that her cousin could drive her over all the way from Romania to Cologne, where Ioana was in the rehabilitation center, and she was in the wheelchair. And she, though the family hoped that she would come back to Romania, to her hometown, that this was hardly possible. We knew that. It was the hometown, the home village. The house is a very poor house with toilet in the garden and no bathroom. And only through donations we could manage to rebuild a bathroom, and which could Ioana fit into with her wheelchair. But actually we knew that somehow this would not be possible, and it came how it came. In January 2019, Ioana died. She died in the results of this beating up and of the spastical paralyzation. Though she learned again to eat and to speak, and her memories came back, but she would never lead a normal life, and she died with 24 years in Cologne. Robert Tanasse in 2015 was sentenced to 8 years for violence He was not sentenced for trafficking or so, or pimping. He was sentenced for violence. 8 years, you know, when there's a good guidance, then he would come free after 4 years. So he should came free in 2019 in February or March or April. But Joanna died in January 2019, and so the quality of the sentence was altered, and he is still in prison, but he was transferred to Romania, as in Romania prison, but he will come free in this year. I'm in regular contact with the mother of Joanna, with Graziella, also in donation raising, because we had to somehow to get donations in order to transfer Joanna's body back to Romania in order to enable a how do you say, momentary. And we did this, and I'm in regular contact with the mother, and there's no week, no day even that we don't write on Facebook. And of course the family is destroyed, but still there is the little David, and David is the only star which lights up, or the sun which lights up the family, the remaining family, the mother and the father. This is David on his first school day, and this is David as well, the only sunshine of the mother. What I show you here is a toilet in Berlin, in the middle of Berlin. This is what prostitution looks like in Germany. This is not a toilet, it's a so-called prostitution box, where in the middle of Berlin, in the street prostitution in Kurfürstenstraße, the Romanian, Bulgarian and Hungarian young women can go with their johns when they buy their so-called sex from them. It's not a toilet, it's a toilet and also a place of, it's a working place for prostitutes, for women in prostitution. This is what it looks like. It's funded by Berlin State in order that the women in prostitution can have a more safer place on the street. I mean, you see how cynical this is. So Joanna was not forced in street prostitution. She was forced only in flats. But this is prostitution in Germany. Come back to you. I stopped the screen sharing. So this is what the source for human trafficking looks like. As we all know, that when we speak between 18 and 98% of migrant women in prostitution, hardly there is some, I do it my own way deliberately. They don't know their rights. They don't know this language. They don't know that police is helpful in Germany, that police is not a corrupt one. They don't know that there's help at hand. They don't know nothing. It's a deeply, so you know this. I don't bring any news to you. This is human trafficking. Yeah? And Joanna is one of the victims. Not every victim ends up in death. But to be honest, there is murder of the soul. Yeah, it's murder of the soul. Prostitution is murder of the soul, and sometimes it's even murder of the body, as in the case of Joanna. I told you, and these are my last remarks, but I told you that we have also the topic of Corona and Ukraine. So let me give you some insights during Corona times. During Corona times, prostitution, of course, in Germany as in other countries has been forbidden, and the women and girls went back to their home countries, first of all. But especially from Romania and Bulgaria and Hungary, in these poor countries of origin, the girls and women came back. They came back because they said, okay, I can starve in Romania as well, but I could do it in Germany, and I could still deliver prostitution and have something to eat, even if it's illegal. So they came back. And where did they end in? They rented Airbnb flats. So, and with the consent of the renters of the Airbnb flats, who profited also from the girls and women, they offered prostitution again, but it was highly risky, and it was of course illegal. Yeah? And now please imagine, this is what we in Solvodi witnessed, is that I mean, you would ask for protection of your clients, yeah, of your sex buyers, of the Johns, so condoms and vaccination certificates and so. But the Johns came and they said, well, oh, I forgot my vaccination certificate. Oh, well, I forgot my condom. As they forget their condoms, or they pay more, or they just tear it off. So they forgot their vaccination certificates, or they were not vaccinated at all. So what did the women do? I mean, they had to accept it, because when they say no, I don't offer you, I do not work with you, they would go one flat next to the next flat, and the next woman in prostitution would do the service. So they were under high pressure in these Corona times. Now in Germany, the brothels opened again, so it's legal again. It's open again for women in prostitution to offer the sex services, but the thing of vaccination still remains. But vaccination is not the problem in prostitution. We know it. It's violence and exploitation. So Corona was also a major issue for us in Solvodi, and it still remains, because when the Johns blackmailed the women in prostitution during Corona times, they still do it now. No? So they're highly at risk. And now let's have a look at the Ukrainian crisis. What I told you before is that now we witness here in Germany this problem that traffickers are approaching the women and children. There are a lot of unaccompanied minor children traveling as well to Germany, as in the Syrian war crisis, by the way, with the other refugee crisis like 7 years ago or 6 years ago. So we have the same issue again. So now the women and children are approached by traffickers or by the forced prostitutes of these traffickers in order to offer them a home, a shelter. And there is what happened is that in Berlin, for example, at the central station, the police, they have issued banning orders against suspicious people, mainly men. This has not only taken place at the main railway station, where really thousands arrive now from Ukraine every day, but also at the central bus stations in, for example, Charlottenburg. And lots of helpers independently reported to the police that these unknown persons have made dubious offers of sleeping places to these refugee women traveling alone or traveling with girls or with minor children. So, and what the strange thing is that the pimps send their forced prostitutes who also came from Ukraine, because women are better making contact with other women. Yeah? So this is the issue we have now, that we have not enough shelter places. This is a German problem. In the women's shelters, we lack more than 20,000 places, shelter places in Germany in normal times. So for the victims of domestic and sexual violence in Germany. But now that we have these 10,000s of additional women coming in, we really are out of service. So we depend on these flats and shelters and good willing hosts to protect the women and children. But as you see, where there's need, where there's misery, where there are refugees, there are the traffickers. And I made an observation, and this is also my last word, that when I Google now Ukrainian women in Germany, the first three things may be news, and then come brothels, refugee porn, so the porn sites, and the brothel sites in Germany, which is horrifying because, well, you know what happens. And this is the case for all crisis, war, and conflict zones. Where there is crisis, conflict, and war, it's a deeply patriarchal phenomenon. Then we have the victims, which are girls and women, vulnerable groups at risk. And maybe one last remark. We do know that the UN resolution 1325 and also 2476 or so, they ban violence against women and rape as a war weapon. But what we will see soon is that also the women in Ukraine will be raped. And this really shocks me and shocks every one of us, because what can we do abroad? Nothing. We just witness this. And the UN resolution won't help, because the warrior in Russia does not keep to resolutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Inge. Thank you. You covered a lot of ground, and not only with names of countries, Ukraine, and so on, but also with this very moving example of Joanna, and also I think it was good for you to remind us of this issue of prostitution in Germany, the Nordic model, and as you said, prostitution is violence against women, is murder of the soul, and also at times of the body. And actually, if I may, there is one question by Marie Power. Is there any evidence of growing awareness among the German population of the awfulness and danger of legalized prostitution? I think you did begin to give an answer to that, but could you briefly answer this?
Thank you very much, Marie Power, for this question. Yes, I can say after 20 years of combating this legalized prostitution thing, there is a growing awareness in the population, because not only the media in the past years reported about this brothel, Europe's biggest brothel, Germany, and the paradise for traffickers, but also a lot of organizations made a Bündnis, an alliance for the Nordic model. And by the way, also the Catholic German Women's Alliance, KDFB, Katholischer Deutscher Frauenbund, they adapted also the Nordic model. So they call also for the Nordic model. So there's a huge movement now to appeal for this Nordic model. And the awareness is definitely raising, so that prostitution is a normal job as every other. No, the awareness is definitely there. But as Stefanie Arzinger also wrote, there's also a very strong lobby, a pro-prostitution lobby. Let's say they have the money, because the pro-prostitution lobby is mainly consisted out of brothel keepers, pimps, and the very, very few so-called deliberate escort women, the German women, they know the language, the laws, and so on. But let's say it's a small minority of people in the prostitution business, but they have the money, so they are allowed, but they are few. And the others, I mean, as you know, Eastern European women in prostitution, they would never be a lobby. So we have to be a lobby for them and raise the voices for them. But yes, hopefully, and thanks God, there is a growing awareness, and growing political pressure.
Thank you very much, Inge. Thank you also for that.